Welcome back to Art Practice ASMR. In this video, I talk about the anime from 2018 that I watched last year. You might notice that this is a topic that I talked about in another video, but since I'm making that video unlisted, I decided to talk about it more in this one. So here we go. The first anime that I will talk about is called Darling in the Franxx. And that was a show that I was very hyped about because I heard that it was being made by a lot of people who worked on the original Evangelion series. And as a huge fan of that series, I had to watch this. And this show was very divisive amongst people who watched it. A lot of people enjoyed the first half but hated the second half. And there were some who hated the show since episode 1. For me, I really liked the first 12 episodes, but I didn't like the second half as much. And I think I might get into that later. But I will start with things I really liked about the show. For one, the show was actually very beautiful. It was well animated. The characters were well designed, but not too flashy. And it even had a lot of CG, and I don't remember any of it being very out of place or scene ruining. So that's very good. The mech designs were very Eva-esque, but they were also very uniquely Trigger. And there was also a cool thing that I liked about this show, where they would sometimes change the aspect ratio to a super widescreen for scenes that were very dramatic or scenes that were very important or relevant. And I thought that was cool. But the annoying thing was the black bars that they added into the show were a different shade of black from the bars in the video player. And with the shape of my monitor, it was actually very noticeable, and it was kind of hard not to notice it, for me at least. But it probably won't be a problem for a lot of other people. There were a lot of things I liked about the plot of the show, but if you ask me to give a basic summary of the show, I'm not sure I could do that without comparing it to two things, which are Evangelion and Mad Max, which sounds weird, but I'll explain. Imagine if Tokyo 3 from Eva was on wheels, and it was traveling through a desolate wasteland trying to get to a destination. And along the way they run into enemies that they have to destroy with their mechs. And that's basically the bare minimum plot of the show. But like how Eva was a metaphor for depression, this show actually had a lot of metaphors for sexuality and puberty and coming of age, and I thought that was really well done. Sometimes it was very overt, but sometimes it was very subtle, like how the mechs had 2 pilots, and they were always one male, one female, and they would be referred to as a pistil and stamen, as in the reproductive organs of a plant, which I thought was very cool and subtle. And the show actually had a lot of references to biology like that, sort of like how Eva had a lot of references to religion. The one thing that really annoyed me about the show was after episode 12, it started to slow down, and eventually they introduced a twist to the show, but they did it very poorly. Minor spoilers from the show. Actually, it's sort of major, but if you don't want to hear it, you can just skip ahead a couple seconds. But the entire show builds up to a reveal that someone was a secret enemy the entire time. But it turns out that they didn't go with the obvious choice of the enemy, and they decided that space aliens that they never mentioned before would be the enemy. And for me, that was the biggest disappointment of the show. It really sucks for A1 Pictures, who animated the second half of the series, because a lot of people blame the bad script writing on them. But it was actually finished at Studio Trigger before the script was handed off to A1 Pictures. So they're basically blaming the wrong man for the job. But nobody really wants to blame Studio Trigger. But whatever. Despite the hand that they were dealt, I think they actually managed to have a good last episode for the series. And it could have been much better if the second half didn't make that weird decision. But I still think it was very well done, despite all the problems that they made for themselves. Next is an anime that needs no introduction. It is My Hero Academia Season 3. If you haven't seen this season, but you've seen the previous seasons, I will give you a little summary of each season. The first season was mainly focused on Deku. The second season focused a lot on Todoroki and Ida. And this season focused on Bakugo and All Might. And if I had to compare it to the other seasons, I would say that it's better than Season 1, but not as eventful as Season 2. Season 2 had a lot going on, but Season 3, even though it doesn't have that much happening in it, it is still one of the seasons that has some of the best moments in the entire series so far. And I wouldn't say that anything in this season was bad, but I would say that I personally didn't like the hero licensing part. It kind of felt like a rehash of the tournament arc from the previous season, and although it introduced some cool characters and concepts, it was still sort of like a lesser version of what happened last season. But I think that the first couple episodes of this season were some of the best that have happened so far. I don't want to be specific because there's a lot of spoilers. If you aren't into seasonal anime like this, I think I would still recommend it, because the show has a different production schedule than shows like One Piece, and I think this would be more manageable to catch up on. But if you aren't into it, then, just watch whatever you want. I'm not the boss of you, or am I? I kind of thought that I had been done drawing. The screen is kind of little, and I'm standing up so I couldn't see what I was doing. For the record, I think that this is the worst drawing that I've done this entire video. And it can only go up from here. Yeah, I really don't like what I ended up with here. I'm still not good at faces, but at the end of the video, I think I draw the best face I've done so far. And it's a girl's face, which is very hard for me, actually. This next show is one that I could not recommend recommend enough. And I know I've talked about it in another video, but I just have to talk about it again, because I feel I didn't do it justice. This show is called Planet With, and it is one of my favorite anime. It's sort of like Kamen Rider and Power Rangers mixed with Evangelion. But it has a lot of unique things going for it. One of which is the fact that the main character is the hero, but he's also the villain. And it's not in the way that Light Yagami was the protagonist and the villain of Death Note. This show is more like if Power Rangers was told from the perspective of the Green Ranger. But there's also giant mechs and aliens and dragons. This show had a lot of things that made me feel very nostalgic for it, which is interesting because it's all an original show. But it sort of felt like something I would watch on a Saturday morning. The show had a lot of CG in it, but somehow, with the color palette that they used, it felt very old and warm, like how older anime feel. And that's not really a feeling I can describe, it's just one that you understand if you know it. This show definitely had that feel, because I noticed that some scenes were sort of inspired by Evangelion, and some were directly replicating animation that was used in Evangelion. There's this one scene where the main character has to save people from a third impact style event, and there's a effect that happens around him that is basically the same exact effect from the episode 25 of Evangelion, when everybody is congratulating Shinji, and when the world kind of just bursts around him. That's what they do in the show, and I thought that was really neat when I noticed it. And there were definitely other things that were visual callbacks to other shows. I kind of feel like I've sounded stupid there, and I finally remembered that visual callback was the word I was looking for. But yeah, I'm kind of flustered today. I've sort of been having an asthma attack all day, and that's why I sound so heavy when I breathe, if you can notice that. Anyway, this show is an action comedy with a lot of mecha stuff, and I don't really know what to say about it. There are some things that you just have to see for yourself, especially when you first see the character Sensei. That might come as a shock to you. There's such a drastic shift in character designs that I kind of think is hilarious. And there was so much wordplay that was great, but it would be even better if I could speak Japanese. It was almost Dragon Ball Z levels of wordplay with the naming of the aliens. And the mech designs, they were all done in CG, but it wasn't that distracting, though the dragon may be distracting to some people. A lot of the mech designs were unique and interesting, but some of them are ones that you probably won't remember. But I think that may be the only complaint I have for the show. No, wait, actually, this is sort of a weird complaint, but the audio mixing was off for a lot of the effects in the show. And sometimes it made battles really intense when the punches hit really loud. But sometimes the effects were too loud that it sort of like blasted my ear holes, so I had to turn down the volume for a lot of scenes, a lot of fight scenes. And I didn't even realize that we switched to another show, which is coincidentally another mech show, sort of, called SSSS.GRIDMAN. I'm not sure if I said enough S's. This show is a spin-off of the Ultraman series, which is a series of live-action Japanese shows. This show focuses on the character Gridman, and unlike its Ultraman counterpart, this show is entirely animated, and it's actually the second mecha show done by Studio Trigger in 2018. And even more of a coincidence, the show also has a lot of references to Evangelion. A lot of them are visual things like camera shots, but one of the biggest examples of inspiration is in 4 characters in Gridman who are referred to as the Neon Genesis junior high students, which is sort of a weird name because at least 3 of them are full-grown adults. But I thought that was funny when I saw that name, and overall I'd say that this show was very good. There was one complaint that I have with the series, or 2 complaints actually, but I think it was trying too hard to replicate the feel of the Ultraman series, which is a tokusatsu series, which means special effects or special filming in Japanese. And shows like that are Power Rangers or Kamen Rider, and they usually have men in spandex suits around sets made to look like buildings. And I've never really been into those, so going into the series I was a little worried. But the first couple episodes felt like they were trying to replicate that too much. They would always do something I found interesting, like deal with psychological things or trauma, but then they would just reset at the end and everything would be happy. And it felt like they were trying to make the show a villain of the week series. And luckily, they found a feel for what the show should be like. They found a way to emulate but not replicate Ultraman, and I'm glad that they did that, because if it just started to be a copy of the show, I probably wouldn't have watched the rest of Gridman. And my only other complaint is a visual complaint, but overall the series might be the most beautiful show that Trigger has done, and there was a lot going for it. But the one thing that I really didn't like was Gridman's final form. Throughout the show, he had 3 main forms, and I think the first 2 were the best looking because they tried the most to be mechanical, because Gridman is a giant mech. And I think the first 2 were the best looking because they actually looked mechanical. But the last costume, which was only in 1 episode, but it tried really hard to, or it didn't try really hard, it was just a straight up hand-drawn version of the spandex suit that they wear in Ultraman. And I think if I had been a fan of the live-action series, I would have really enjoyed seeing that. But as someone who generally didn't like that kind of stuff, I felt that it was just weird looking and kind of cheesy. And I'm not going to pull it up, but if you look on your own, you can see a side-by-side by all three forms in the anime. And the final form is definitely weird looking compared to the others. And I wish that they had just gone with a straight mechanical version for the final form. But that's just from my perspective. All that being said, after finishing Gridman, I did try to give other tokusatsu series a try. I am currently watching season 1 of Amazon Riders, which is a side story of Kamen Rider. And I started watching this because it's a self-contained story. And I always feel like there's some sort of discrepancy between Japanese live action and Japanese animated. But maybe it just feels cheesier in the live action shows because the anime is just usually at a more stunning quality. And even though I kind of felt that the first episodes of Amazon Riders were rough, I've actually been really enjoying it. And after I finish the 2 seasons and then the movie, I might try watching the main series Kamen Rider. But probably just the current one that's going on, even though it's supposed to be like a, best of series. I don't know how to describe it, but even though it's a self-referential season that's going on right now, I don't really want to watch all the other seasons because there's like 10 of them, and they all have 40 plus episodes, and I think that's a lot of time to dedicate to that, so I'll probably just watch the most recent season if I do. Anyway, I totally recommend Gridman. It's a great anime, and I think you will love it. I think this is the best thing I've drawn in this video, and I'm actually pretty proud of it, so that's cool. Now moving on to the next anime on this list. It is a series called Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai. And I had wanted to watch this show since I saw a clip from it. And in the clip, there was a boy talking to a bunny girl in a library. And the bunny girl was apparently invisible to everyone except for the boy. And I had figured that the entire series would be a romance where they're trying to cope with her invisibility, and eventually towards the end of the series, solving it. But I was ready to drop the series after 3 episodes, because they were getting very close to solving her problem. And it wasn't until episode 4 that I realized that this show wasn't going to be a typical romance show, and it was going to be closer to Bakemonogatari in structure, where the entire series is split into 3 episode arcs. The first one, the main character meets his girlfriend, and they try to maintain their relationship throughout the show. But in each story arc, he meets a girl who is being plagued by puberty syndrome, which is the equivalent to the supernatural stuff from Bakemonogatari, where puberty syndrome is psychological issues that are being personified by physics theories, like Schrodinger's cat and quantum teleportation. And in each 3-episode arc, the main character tries to help a girl out with her problem, while also trying to maintain his relationship with his girlfriend. And once I realized that the show was more like Bakemonogatari, I enjoyed it a lot. The only time I didn't enjoy the show, other than the initial episodes, was the last episode, and it wasn't because it was bad. They just had one unsatisfying thing that happened in it, and even though it ended well for everyone, I feel like they didn't have to do that one thing. And if you've seen the show already, you might know what I'm talking about, but I don't really want to get specific into it, because there's not much time left on this video. The other complaint that I have is about the title of the show. The show is called Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai. And I think if it had any other name, I wouldn't have expected what I expected initially. If they had just called the show Puberty Syndrome, then I wouldn't have expected it all to be about one girl. But since they didn't, it was, I never noticed that it would be about several girls. And maybe this was just something that I had a problem with, but maybe someone else was as confused as me. Anyway, I think I've talked about everything that I needed to talk about. There are some shows that I'm excited for in 2019, like the Accelerator series, which is based off of the character from Railgun and Index. And there's also Sarazanmai, which is a new anime that looks very interesting. But that's all time I have for this video. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.